The following is a short documentary film, which is created in an attempt to educate people about the history of Islam, from the beginning of mankind till the death of the last and final messenger of the God. Welcome to the abridged chronological history of Islam. The way of life designated by the God. Allah. The God, He is just one, without a second. The only uncreated, and ever-existing. The God is free from all needs. And all are His slaves, and are, under His ultimate supreme power. The God is above the knowledge, wisdom, and comprehension of everyone and everything. And there is none, equivalent or comparable, unto Him. The God is the creator of all traits, and He has designated many traits for Himself. Islam. The way of life, designated by the God, where its followers, Muslims, acquire peace by submitting their will to the will of the God. The faiths and the beliefs of the Muslims are based on the Quran and the Hadith. Islam is a state of life, and the Muslims believe that God is just one, and creatures with free will, mankind and jinn, will have to answer for their deeds, on the day of judgment in the hereafter, to the God. Adam. The first human, a physical creature with spirit and free will, and a prophet, ordained to follow Islam by the God. Angel. A living spiritual creature, without free will. The only creations of the God, who have free will, and the intellect to recognize free will, are mankind and jinn. Creations with free will have the ability, and choice, to obey or disobey the God, for the living period of the worldly life, but, the creations without free will, does not have the understanding, choice or ability to disobey the God. Angels have the understanding of free will, but they do not possess the free will. Satan. A jinn, a living spiritual creature, who has free will, is the Iblis, the one causes despair, who disobeyed the God, and despised Adam, sworn to manipulate the children of Adam, to make them worship other than the one true God. And Satan whispers into the heart of the children of Adam, to commit deeds that the one true God condemns, and impedes mankind from obeying commandments of the God, and make them forget, and hopeless, about hereafter, and the day of judgment. Quran. The word of the God, and the last installment and fulfillment of the God's revelation, revealed to Prophet Muhammad, the last messenger of the God, gradually, in stages based on situations, for the final generation of mankind, before the end of this world. The verses of the Quran are known as ayat. Ayat means, communications, proofs, evidences, verses, lessons, signs, revelations, etc. The revelations, which were revealed to the previous generations and prophets before Prophet Muhammad, were corrupted and concocted by the followers of the religion, to make their evil actions legitimate. As there will be no other prophet after Prophet Muhammad to rectify the revelation of the God, from concoction or corruption, the God is going to protect the Quran for the last generation of mankind, and no one will be able to concoct or corrupt the Quran. Hadith. Hadith literally means sayings. When hadith is used in an Islamic context, it is referred to the sayings of the messengers of the God. Messengers of the God are blessed with two things, the word of the God, and divine wisdom. When messengers of the God, speaks from his divine wisdom, the followers preserves his sayings as guidelines. Before following any hadith, a Muslim has to authenticate whether the saying was truly said by the messenger of the God. When the Muslims today refers to the hadith, it refers to the saying of messenger of the God, Muhammad. The sayings of the messenger of the God Muhammad has been compiled and preserved by the companions and their students. There are sciences behind the collection of the hadith, and if anybody studies those sciences they will be able to ascertain the authenticity of the hadith. The God sent many prophets and messengers, like Enoch, Noah, Eber, Saleh, Jethro, Job, Elisha, and many others, to every nation, in every generation, to protect mankind from the misguidance of Shaitan, and to manifest them, in a peaceful and civilized way of life. This way of life is known as the straight path, which will lead people to the Jannah, in the afterlife. Jannah literally means to be hidden out, a garden. In the Islamic context, Jannah is referred to the paradise. According to the Quran, Jannah is a place where all that the inner selves desire, all that the eyes delight, will come true, and people of Jannah will abide therein forever. No one knows what has been hidden for them of comfort as reward in Jannah, for the deeds of the present worldly life. On the other hand, those who are averse to follow the way of life from the God, even after comprehending it, will be propelled in the Nari Jahannam to abide forever, in their afterlife. Nari Jahannam literally means hellfire. The evildoers and the sinners will be recompensed for their deeds of their present life, in the afterlife, in the Jahannam. The Jannah and the Jahannam is beyond the imagination of any mind. In the afterlife, the God will deal every individual in truth, and with justice, and they will only be recompensed, for the which they have earned, in the present life of this world. Those who were unfortunate, and didn't receive message of the God by the messengers, will be tested in the afterlife by the God, and then destined either for Jannah or Jahannam. The Muslims strongly believe in the Qadar. Qadar is the belief that the God is all-knowledgeable, and He knows everything of the past, present, and the future, and the God has predetermined everything, and the knowledge of this predetermination has been hidden from His creation, except for the part which the God has revealed to His creation. According to the Quran, whoever is guided, is only guided for the benefit of his soul. And whoever errs, only errs, against his soul. And no bearer of burdens, will bear the burden of another. And never will the God punish, until the God sent a messenger. Therefore, the Muslims work on the righteousness to acquire goodness in their present worldly life, and for the afterlife. God commanded Adam, the first human being and a prophet, to build a mosque, meaning a sanctuary, a place of worship, where people could gather together to worship the one true God. Adam built a cuboid room, as a place of worship for the God, known today as Kaaba, which means a square, in Mecca, also known as Bakka. Allah, the God, has ordained mankind to perform Hajj to the Kaaba, since the beginning of mankind. Hajj is a pilgrimage. It's a journey that Muslims make to unite together, from everywhere from the world, to pray and worship the God unitedly. After Prophet Adam, during the flood of Prophet Noah, the Kaaba got ruined, except for its foundation. Abraham was a prophet who was sent after Prophet Noah. He lived near Canaan. He had two sons, Ishmael and Isaac. His elder son Ishmael lived in Mecca, also known as Bakka, and his younger son Isaac lived in Canaan. Abraham and Ishmael were ordained by the God to rebuild the Kaaba, and thus they rebuilt Kaaba, on Kaaba's previous foundation. The Kaaba contains a black stone, which is from Jannah, the paradise. Jannah is the final and permanent abode for the Muslims, therefore, the black stone is a piece of home for the Muslims. The black stone can neither harm or benefit anyone, but is admired by all the Muslims. The black stone is a cornerstone, and the starting point of a ritual where Muslims circumambulate the Kaaba, and testify that God is just one, and there are no associates with the God. Isaac had two sons, Esau and Jacob. Jacob was also known as Israel. Jacob had 12 sons, and one of them was Joseph, who became a prophet. During the time of Prophet Joseph, the children of Israel migrated to Egypt. Generations later, another prophet, Moses, brought back the children of Israel from Egypt to the land of Canaan. During these periods, many of the children of Israel migrated to Sheba, present-day Yemen, and Khyber. From Sheba, some sects of the children of Israel emigrated to Yathrib, and from there to Khyber. The people of Mecca were Muslims and monotheists, that is, worshipper of one true God. But a few generations after Prophet Ishmael, they got misguided by the Satan and became mushrikun, meaning polytheists, who worship many gods, and pantheists, who believe that God and the universe are the same, and that God exists in His creations. The God sent His last and final prophet and messenger, Muhammad, from the family of Prophet Abraham, by the elder son Prophet Ishmael, in Mecca, about 570 years after Prophet Jesus, in the 6th century CE. Prophet Muhammad was chosen by the God as the savior of the last generation of mankind, who would guide mankind to salvation. Prophet Muhammad received prophethood at the age of 40, and started propagating monotheism to the people of Mecca. Many, among the people of Mecca, accepted Islam by his call. However, the polytheists of Mecca hated the concept of worshipping the one God, because that would mean their all other deities are false gods. Therefore, the mushrikun, the polytheists, started persecuting the Muslims. According to the Quran, the God can forgive any sin, if He pleases. For the sin of shirk, the sinner has to repent, make tawbah, to become sinless. If anyone commits shirk, after the message of the God has been manifested to him, or her, and dies without seeking forgiveness, is destined to hellfire. Shirk is the greatest sin in Islam. Shirk literally means to make partners. In the Islamic context, shirk is referred to the act of associating, or invoking, or creating rival, with the God. According to the Quran, shirk can be committed by the following ways. If anyone associate the credentials of the God with anyone or anything, or associate anyone or anything in worship with the God, is shirk, by association. Do they associate with Him, the God, those who create nothing, and they are themselves created? Had there been within the heavens and earth gods besides Allah, the God, they both would have been ruined, in a state of confusion and disorder. So exalted is Allah, Lord of the throne, above what they attribute and describe. Allah, the God, has not taken any son, nor has there ever been with Him any deity. If there had been, then each deity would have taken what it created, and some of them would have sought to overcome others. Exalted is Allah, the one true God, above what they attribute and describe. If anyone chooses to obey others, or himself, against the command of the God, is shirk, by creating rival. And of mankind, are some who take, for worship, others besides Allah, as rival. They love them as they love Allah, the one true God. But those who believe, love Allah, the one true God, more. If only those who do wrong could see, when they will see the torment, that all power belongs to Allah, and that Allah, the God, is severe in punishment. Have you seen him, who takes his own lust, vain desires, as his ilah, God, and Allah, the God, knowing him as such, left him astray, and sealed his hearing and his heart, and put a cover over his sight? Who then will guide him after Allah, the God? Will you not then be mindful, understand, receive admonition, remember? And when adversity touches man, he calls upon us, the God. Then when we, the God, bestow on him a favor from us, the God, he says, I have only been given it, because of my knowledge. Rather, it is a trial, but most of them do not know. They have taken their scholars and monks, as lords besides the God, and also the Messiah, the Son of Mary. And they were not commanded except to worship one God. There is no deity except Him, Allah the God. Exalted is He, the God, above whatever they associate with him. A hadith has been narrated in relation to this ayat. Once, while the messenger of the God was reciting the above ayat, Adi bin Hatim said, "O messenger of the God, but they, Jews and Christians, do not worship them, scholars and monks." The messenger of the God replied, "They certainly do. They, scholars and monks, made legal things illegal, and illegal things legal, and they followed them. And by doing so they really worship them. And they set up rival to Allah, the God, to mislead from his path. Say, enjoy. But certainly, your destination is the fire." Narrated Abdullah. The Prophet said one statement and I said another. The Prophet said, "Whoever dies, while still invoking anything other than Allah, as a rival to Allah, will enter hell." And I said, "Whoever dies, without invoking anything as a rival to Allah, will enter paradise." If anyone invoke or pray to anyone or anything other than the one true God, or make anyone or anything as intercession, shafa'ah, with the God, is shirk, by invocation. Who is more unjust than one who invents a lie against Allah, the God, or rejects his ayat? Those will attain their portion of the decree, until when our messengers, Allah, the God's messengers, angels, come to them to take them in death, they will say, "Where are those you used to invoke besides Allah?" They will say, "They have departed from us," and will bear witness against themselves, as they were the rejectors of truth, rightness and Islam. Those whom they invoke besides Allah, have not created anything, but are themselves created. And they worship other than Allah, that which neither harms them, nor benefits them, and they say, "These are our intercessors with Allah." Say, do you inform Allah of something He does not know, in the heavens or on the earth? Exalted is He, and high above what they associate with Him. And when my servants ask you, O Muhammad, concerning me, indeed I, Allah, am near. I, Allah, respond to the invocation of the supplicant, when he calls upon me. So let them respond to me, and believe in me, that they may be rightly guided. And truly you have come unto us, Allah, alone, as we, Allah, created you the first time. You have left behind you all that which we had bestowed on you. We see not with you your intercessors, whom you claim to be partners with Allah. Now, all relations between you and them have been cut off, and all that you used to claim has vanished from you. Whenever anyone invoke anything besides the God, that object becomes associated as a partner with the God. And whenever an object is associated as a partner with the God, that object becomes a rival to the God. Let us analyze a real-life situation, to elaborate how and when shirk may be committed. Let's just say, there is a certain tree, whose fruit, eaten over a period of time, can cure a very complicated disease. Unfortunately, because of this unique quality of the tree to cure the complicated disease, many ignorant people had taken to worshipping this tree, and they consider the tree divine. A young man was suffering from this disease. He starts eating fruits from this tree, hoping that it will cure his disease. Has the young man committed shirk? The answer will depend on the mental state of the young man, who had consumed the fruit. If he had eaten the fruit, thinking that the tree is divine, and it has some supernatural power, by which it can cure diseases, then he has certainly committed shirk. But, if he ate the fruit, believing that the tree has the natural healing properties bestowed by the God, and the tree does not have any supernatural, or divine power, to choose who to bless on, but serve all equally, then it will not be shirk. All the judgments are made by the God, and all the creations, sun, moon, stars, planets, etc., follow the commandments of the God. For example, the sun does not have a choice, but to serve equally on everyone. If people pray to the cloud for rain, the cloud do not have the ability to cause rain, except by the permission of the God. Therefore, praying to the cloud for rain is shirk, and useless. Only praying to Allah, the God, can cause blessings to descend. the God is the most gracious, the most merciful. Thus, the God will forgive all sins, no matter how heinous the sins are, even shirk, and grants Jannah to anyone who sincerely does tawbah. Tawbah literally means to return back, to repent. In the Islamic context, tawbah is referred to the seeking of forgiveness from the God, after committing a sin, and returning to the way of life from the God. The person who does tawbah has to be sincere in repentance, admit to a sin, and decide never to repeat the sin, for his tawbah to be acceptable. But if anyone continues to commit sin, willingly and knowingly, until his or her death arrive, and tawbah at this moment of death, will not be accepted by the God. But for any evil doing, crimes like rape, murder, or physical injury, etc., the wrongdoer has to be mended, or punished, according to the God, to become sinless. And if their heart is sincere, and regretful of their evil deeds, then their tawbah will be accepted by the God. The God informed the mankind that Allah, the God, wishes to accept the repentance, but those who follow their own lusts and desires, wishes that the rightly guided should deviate tremendously away from the right path. And many guides and leads mankind astray, by their own desires, and through lack of knowledge. The God sent many messengers to guide and lead mankind, but the Satan made the deeds of the misguided people fair seeming to them. Whoever desires the life of this world and its adornments, the God will fully pay them for their deeds, things they desired, and worked for, but which was against the way of life designated by the God, for example sinful things, crimes etc., and the God will not deprive these people from what they desired and worked for, in the life of this world, but these people will have nothing in the hereafter, except the fire. And vain is what these people earned, and worthless is what they used to do, in the living period of worldly life before their death. Many people of Mecca recognized the truth of Islam, and the messenger of the God, but still chose not to become Muslims, because of the fear that they might have to lose their social status. Some among them sympathized with the Muslims, and in many occasions helped out the Muslims, when they were being persecuted in Mecca. But most of Kuffar were violently against Islam, and cognitively rationalized their rejection of truth. Kufr literally means to cover up, conceal, or to hide. In the Islamic context, the act of rejecting the haqq, truth, rightness, etc., even after recognizing and comprehending the haqq, truth, rightness, etc., is known as kufr. A person who does kufr is known as a kuffar or kafir. The kafirun, the ones who rejects the truth, and goes against the rightness, are considered as the worst of the creatures in Islam. Initially, Muslims were ordained to keep patience against the torture of the polytheists, but eventually the torture became very brutal and many Muslims were killed. These dead Muslims are referred as shaheed, or shuhada. Shaheed or shuhada literally means to testify, give evidence, bear witness, etc. In the Islamic context, shaheed or shuhada is referred to those who were killed because of their faith, and their death testifies, gives evidence, that he or she was killed only for being a Muslim. According to the Quran, the shaheed are not dead, but in paradise, and the shaheed will not have to answer for their deeds on the day of judgment to the God, and the shaheed will directly go to the Jannah, the paradise, at the moment of death. After the death of the Muslims, by the hand of the mushrikun, the polytheists, Muslims were instructed, and ordained by the God, to leave their properties, and land, and migrate to save their lives. So a party of the Muslims immigrated to Abyssinia, which was a Christian nation, and sought asylum there. After some time, more Muslims emigrated to Abyssinia as Abyssinia was more hospitable than Mecca. Later on some of the Muslims returned back from Abyssinia, as they thought that situation in Mecca have improved. Unfortunately they discovered that it was the reverse. A new chapter was added to the oppression of Muslims in Mecca. Muslims were now boycotted both socially and economically. Persecution too had increased. Now the Muslims were even unable to migrate from Mecca, as many have been house arrested, and confined to their homes by the polytheists. The Muslims were afflicted by extreme oppressions and cruelties by the mushrikun of Mecca, not for any crime, but for their faith, In Islam, the lives of the Muslims were full of jihad, and the God commanded the Muslims to embrace sabr. Jihad literally means overcoming hardship, difficulty, calamity, to struggle, and strive, etc. In the Islamic context, jihad is referred to the struggles that Muslims have to face while maintaining and striving for a life, according to the will of the God. And sabr literally means forbearance, patience, steadfastness, perseverance or endurance. Sabr is very imperative in Islam, and it is obligatory for all the Muslims to endure sabr, and the God is always with the sabrun, those who have patience, forbearing, steadfast, perseverance and enduring. Sabr for jihad doesn't mean to tolerate injustice, but it means to patiently struggle and strive towards justice. It was in a situation like this, that 6 people from Yathrib came for pilgrimage to the Kaaba in Mecca and accepted Islam. They returned back to Medina and propagated Islam there. There were more than 20 Jewish tribes in Yathrib. The major tribes among them were Banu Qaynuqa, Banu an-Nadir, and Banu Qurayza. And there were many Arab tribes, and the major tribes among them were Aus and Khazraj. Many, among the people of Yathrib, accepted Islam, once they came to know about it. Next year, a group of 12 leaders from the tribes of Aus and Khazraj of Yathrib, came to Mecca for pilgrimage and accepted Islam. They pledged to the Prophet not to join anything in worship, along with the one true God, not to steal, not to commit adultery, or fornicate, not to kill their children, out of fear of poverty, despising female children, etc., not to slander, or falsely accuse an innocent person, and not to be disobedient, when ordered, to do good deeds. The converts from Yathrib requested the Prophet for a scholar, who could preach and teach Islam to them in Yathrib, and teach them the way of life that has been ordained by the God. Scholars propagated, and more people including some Jews entered the fold of Islam in Yathrib. Thus, Yathrib became a sanctuary for the Muslims, where they could practice their religion, with liberty. Meanwhile, in Mecca situations deteriorated further for the Muslims, and persecution turned inhuman. Because of this, the Muslims of Yathrib were distressed, as they knew that while they are living a prosperous and peaceful life in Yathrib, their Muslim brothers in Mecca were being oppressed and persecuted. So during the next pilgrimage season, when 70 people from Yathrib met the Prophet, they requested, and persuaded the Messenger of the God, and the Meccan Muslims, to come over and stay with him in Yathrib. This is known as the Second Aqaba Pledge. They pledged to the Prophet for the same conditions as in the first Aqaba Pledge, only this time there was one more addition, that they will obey Allah, the God, and His Messenger in all situations. Therefore, the Muslims of Mecca left all their properties and emigrated to Yathrib to live peacefully. The Muslims of Mecca, who emigrated to Yathrib to escape persecution, were known as Muhajir, meaning the emigrants. The original inhabitants of Yathrib, who helped the Muhajir, and gave them asylum were known as the Ansar, meaning helpers. For the Meccan Muslims, emigration to Yathrib was easier compared to Abyssinia, because Yathrib was closer to Mecca than Abyssinia. They did not have to cross the Red Sea, and it was less expensive. The Prophet was the last person to emigrate to Yathrib. The Prophet reached Quba, a suburb in the outskirts of Yathrib. As soon as the news of his arrival spread through Yathrib, the people of Yathrib flocked in to greet the beloved Prophet with great merriment and joy. In Quba, the Prophet laid down the foundation for the Quba Mosque. After staying in Quba for 4 nights, the Prophet set off towards his final destination in Yathrib. There he bought a piece of land, and built a mosque, known today as Masjid an-Nawawi, meaning the Prophet's Mosque. The Messenger of the God then laid down the Constitution of Yathrib, later to be known as Constitution of Medina. Some of the provisions of the Constitution are shown here. The following clauses of the Constitution was binding upon all the citizens of the state of Medina. The security of God is equal for all groups. All communities shall be constitutionally subjected to the state. It shall be incumbent upon the non-Muslims to observe and adhere to any peace treaty they are invited to participate in. Likewise, it shall also be incumbent upon the Muslims to observe and adhere to any peace treaty they are invited to. The valley of Medina is sacred, and there shall be prohibition of fighting and bloodshed among the various communities of the state. The Muslims, and the non-Muslims, shall be jointly responsible to defend the state of Medina against any outside attack. Every party to the treaty shall be responsible for the measures and arrangements of the defense of its facing direction. Verily, whoever goes out on a military expedition shall be provided with security, and whoever stays in Medina shall have likewise, except those who commit oppression and violate the contents of this constitution. No party shall have the right to violate the constitution. Every person who is guilty of a crime shall be held responsible for his act alone. Verily, this constitutional document shall not protect any traitor or oppressor. The following provisions in the constitution was binding exclusively on the Muslims of Medina. Muslims are one community to the exclusion of all men. Muslims shall not leave Muslim destitute. The Muslims shall not leave a debtor among them, but shall help him in paying his ransom, according to what shall be considered fair. A Muslim who believes in the God, and in the hereafter, and agrees to the contents of this document, shall not provide any protection or concession to those who engage in mischief and subversion against this constitution. There shall be collective resistance by the Muslims against any individual who rises in rebellion, attempts to acquire anything by force, seeks to spread injustice, or sin or animosity, or corruptions, violates any pledge or attempts to spread mischief amongst the Muslims. Such collective resistance against the perpetrator shall occur even if he is the son of any one of them. Whenever Muslims differ on a matter, it must be referred to the God and the Messenger of the God. The God's protection is one, the least of them may give protection to a stranger on their behalf. The peace granted by the believers shall be one. If there is any war in the way of Allah, no Muslims shall make any treaty of peace with the enemy, apart from other Muslims, unless that is based on equality and fairness among all. The constitution had the following provisions for the non-Muslims, that is the Jews, polytheists and other faiths in Medina. The non-Muslim shall be considered a community along with the Muslims. They shall be guaranteed the right of religious freedom, along with the Muslims. The right shall be conferred on their associates, as well as themselves, except those who are guilty of oppression, or the violators of treaties. They will bring evil only on themselves. Non-Muslim members have equal political and cultural rights as Muslims. They will have autonomy, and freedom of religion. The non-Muslims will be responsible for their expenditure, and the Muslims theirs. If attacked by a third party, citizens of Medina shall come to the assistance of the other. Each party shall hold counsel with the other, and the wrong party should be assisted. All citizens of Medina shall contribute to defending Medina, in case of a foreign attack in its respective area. The non-Muslims shall contribute to the cost of war, so long as they are fighting alongside the Muslims. Non-Muslims will not be obliged to take part in religious wars of the Muslims. Citizens of Medina, non-Muslims and Muslims should boycott Meccan polytheists commercially. They shall also abstain from extending any support to them. Medina shall be a sanctuary for the people of this document. The Messenger of the God then changed the name of Yathrib to Medina Munawwara, meaning the city of enlightenment, and Medina became an Islamic state. After the Prophet's arrival in Medina, people entered Islam in multitudes, open-heartedly, with sincere faith. It is forbidden to compel anyone into Islam. And compelling anyone into Islam is impossible, because Muslims believe that the God judges human being by their heart and actions. If the heart does not agree with the action, then the deed is not accepted by the God, whether good or evil. Soon, majority of the population of Medina became Muslims. But some people from among the Jews, and the polytheists of Medina, entered Islam only to make political and economic gains. They are referred in the Quran as munafiq. Munafiq is a person who does nifaq. The word nifaq means a hole, or a tunnel. In the Islamic context, munafiq is referred to a hypocrite. a person who pretends and shows off to be a Muslim, but in reality he is a non-Muslim at heart. Some among the munafiqun, the hypocrites, had the objective of benefiting themselves from the Muslims' prosperities, and to take advantage of their generosity, while some others entered Islam to create dissensions among the Muslims. The hypocrites pretended to have faith in the God and the Day of Judgment, but in reality they did not believe. Muslims were betrayed by the hypocrites on several occasions. Initially, the Muhajirs, emigrant Muslims, in Medina were destitute, as they had left all their properties and belongings in Mecca. The Muhajirs arrived Medina empty-handed, as they were extorted by the polytheists in Mecca. The polytheists attempted every means to bar the Muslims of Mecca from migrating. But the Ansars, the citizens of Medina, helpers, came to the aid of the Muhajirs, emigrants from Mecca, and shared their properties with them. Thus within a short period of time the Muhajirs had become solvent, and were living happily in Medina. The Muhajirs were grateful to the Ansar, because the Ansar did everything to accommodate the Muhajirs, and protected the Muhajirs from the polytheists, and created an opportunity for the Muhajirs to live a life with liberty. Being generous, helpful, compassionate and grateful are essential components of being a Muslim. In the Quran, the God have criticized those who are not generous, helpful, compassionate or grateful, and have commanded the Muslims to be generous, helpful, compassionate and grateful. The Messenger of the God, Muhammad have taught the Muslims, that, those who are not grateful to the people, are not grateful to the God, and those who are not grateful to the God, are not grateful to the people. And being generous, helpful, and compassionate towards the people, is like serving the God, and those who are not generous, helpful and compassionate towards people, are not serving the God. Being generous, helpful, compassionate and grateful in Islam, are not limited to the Muslims, but also to the non-Muslims. 2 years after the emigration, the direction of Salah for the Muslims was changed. Salah literally means to connect. In Islamic context, Salah is referred when a Muslim speaks with the God, and programs himself, or herself, with the word of the God. Salah has been ordained by God to all Muslims since the time of Prophet Adam. It is an activity through which the Muslims establish a connection with the God, affirms their faith and covenants with the God, and seek His forgiveness, guidance, and help. From the time of Prophet Adam, until Prophet Solomon, prophets and Muslims had to offer Salah while facing the direction of Kaaba. At the time of Prophet Solomon, the direction for the Salah was changed to Baitul Muqaddas, to make Salah easy for the Muslims, as Islam was spreading from there. All Muslims and prophets after Prophet Solomon, like Isaiah, Zechariah, John, Jesus and Muhammad, had to offer Salah, facing Baitul Muqaddas. In the year 624 CE, God ordained to change the direction of Salah, to make Salah easy for the Muslims, because at that time, Islam was spreading from Mecca and Medina. Kaaba was designated as the direction for Salah for the final generation of mankind. Polytheists of Mecca did everything they could have done to assassinate the Messenger of the God, to prevent him from migrating to Medina. But their every attempt failed, and these failures were unpalatable for them. Ever since the migration of the Messenger of the God, the polytheists of Mecca were scheming and preparing to attack Medina. While Muslims were in Mecca, the God forbade Muslims to fight even in self-defense. As Muslims were few in number and helpless, fighting even in self-defense could have been fatal. In Mecca Muslims had no choice but to accept the oppression, or to migrate. But, after migration to Medina, the God allowed the Muslims to fight for their right, justice, and to defend themselves. The God revealed, permission to fight has been given to those who are being fought, and were wronged. And indeed, Allah, the God, is able to give them victory. They are those who have been unjustly evicted from their homes, only because they say, "Our Lord is Allah, the one true God." And were it not that Allah tests one set of people by means of another, there would have been demolished monasteries, churches, synagogues, and mosques in which the name of Allah is much mentioned. And Allah will surely support those who support Him. Indeed, Allah, the God, is powerful and exalted in might. In the year 624 CE, the polytheists of Mecca were preparing for a great attack on Medina. And they were gathering every means to strengthen their army. A caravan of Mecca was bringing great provisions from Syria to Mecca, with only 40 guards. This information reached the Muslims, and they thought, this is a good opportunity to mend for their lost wealth in Mecca. As the Muslims were extorted by the polytheists of Mecca before the migration to Medina, Muslims had to leave their all lands and properties in Mecca. And if the Muslims are able to overtake this caravan, it will delay the attack from Mecca, and prevent the army of Mecca from getting more powerful. So the Muslims prepared an attack on the caravan. The Muslims were able to gather only 310 men, 60 from the Muhajir, and 250 from the Ansar. As there were only 40 guards with the caravan, the Muslims thought 310 men were sufficient to overtake the caravan, and the Muslims would have the upper hand. Unfortunate for the Muslims, the leader of the caravan of Mecca learned about this attack through his scouts, and brought the caravan back to Mecca by a different route. Meanwhile, when the caravan was returning Mecca, the polytheists of Mecca also learned about the preparation of attack by the Muslims on their caravan, and the polytheists of Mecca sent prepared 1,000 soldiers to eradicate the Muslims, and kill the messenger of the God. After reaching Mecca, the leader of the caravan sent scouts to the leaders of the polytheist army, to return Mecca, as the caravans have safely returned Mecca, but the leaders of the polytheist army saw this as a grand opportunity to kill the messenger of the God and eradicate the Muslims. The two armies fought at a place called Badr, and with the mercy of the God, the army of Medina defeated and humiliated the Meccan army. On that day, the Meccan polytheists suffered great losses. 70 from amongst their ranks were killed, many of whom were nobles and leaders from the tribes of Mecca, and 70 more were taken captives. Only 14 were shaheed, from amongst the Muslims. In the 6th century CE, war captives were either killed brutally or were enslaved and thrown into the life of hardship forever, but in Islam it is forbidden to treat inhumanly anyone. When the terms captives and enslavement are used in Islam, they are not meant in their conventional sense. In Islam, when enemies are captured during war, they are taken as captives, to ensure that the enemies do not get the opportunity to reorganize themselves and attack the Muslims again. Manifest guidelines have been given to the Muslims regarding the treatment of captives in the Quran, and the authentic hadith of the Messenger of the God. The guidelines for treatment of the captives are as follows. Prisoners of war should not be killed unless they are guilty of war crimes. It is prohibited for Muslims to commit zina, adultery, fornication etc., or rape. It is illegal to separate related captives or prisoners of war. The captives should be guarded but not ill-treated. The Messenger of the God urged the Muslims to treat the captives well and give them priorities over themselves. The captives must be clothed and fed well in a dignified manner. Captives can get their freedom in any of the following ways. Captives can be ransomed for money. The money demanded will depend on the financial background of the captive. Captives may be set free after they have provided some sort of service to the Muslims for a determined period of time, for example, teaching Muslim kids to read and write, etc. Captives who swear that they will never raise their swords against the Muslims will be set free. Slave traders are considered as criminals in the Islamic society. Muslims are not allowed to enslave anyone, and are encouraged to banish the slave trade, if they had the authority. According to the hadith, the Messenger of the God said, "The God will be the opponent in the afterlife, of those who sells people for a price." Therefore the Muslims are not allowed to enslave anyone, and sell them for a price. But, if Muslims do not possess the authority, the Muslims are allowed to buy slaves from the slave traders, and it is encouraged in the Quran and Hadith to manumit the slaves, and manumitting slaves are considered as deeds of great piety in Islam. The captives and slaves can only be held as a paid worker, under the surveillance of a Muslim guardian, and according to the Quran, there shall be a written contract, mentioning all the clause about their work, salary, and the price of exemption from the hold. The guardian will also have to share their wealth with their slaves or captives, hold workers, on a reasonable basis. The guardians are not allowed to compel their captives or slaves to commit sins or crimes, steal, prostitution, murder, etc. But, if any guardian forces his or her slave, or captive, to commit a crime or a sin, and if the captive or the slave helplessly commits it, the captive or the slave will be free of guilt, and sinless, and the guardian will be charged with the crime, and the guardian will be sinful. The God have provided manifest guidelines by His messenger, regarding the treatment of bought slaves and war captives. The ruling of bought slaves and war captives are: a slave or a captive has to maintain conditions with their guardian. There are two ways in which a slave or a captive is employed with their guardian. The guardian will be responsible for the livelihood, education, marriage, protection, etc., for the slave or captive, and the slave or captive will work for his guardian. The slave or the captive will live as a freeman, earn their own livelihood, work according to their own choice, but will be responsible and provide for the livelihood of the guardian. Sometimes the slaves were more enriched and solvent than their guardians. If any slave or captive disagree with the arrangement with the guardian, then they can go to the court or a judge for justification. The messenger of the God also said the following regarding the slaves: "Your slaves are your brothers, and Allah has put them under your command. Whoever has a brother, that is a slave, under his command, should feed him of what he eats, and dress him of what he wears. Do not ask your slaves to do things beyond their capacity, and if you do so, then help them. Ask for their slaves help in what is too much for you, and help them in what is too much for them. If anyone murders, or injures his slave, then the perpetrator of the crime will be penalized with capital punishment, or will be punished with the same injuries that the perpetrator has done to the slave. If somebody slanders his slave, then he will be flogged on the day of resurrection, unless the slave is really as he has described him. He who hits a slave, the expiation for it is that he should set the slave free. Not one of you should say, 'This is my slave,' or 'This is my slave girl.' He should call them 'my daughter,' or 'my son,' or 'my brother.' The messenger of the God encouraged masters of female slaves to teach the slaves good manners, and to educate the slaves in the best possible way, and manumit and marry the slaves. In Islam, it is prohibited for both men and women to have sexual relations with anybody outside marriage. Masters of the slaves are not allowed to have sexual relations with their slaves, if they are not married. But the masters may marry the slaves, if the slaves consent to it. The slaves can marry anyone of their choice, but with the permission of their masters. Allah the Almighty has encouraged the freeing of slaves, and the expiation of many offenses is freeing of slaves. The Muslims treated the polytheist captives of the Battle of Badr in accordance with the guidelines ordained by the God. The Muslims would share the better part of their food with the captives, and share their animals as ride with the captives. Thus the captives were impressed by the generosity of the Muslims, and many among them accepted Islam. Many of the captives were ransomed for money, depending on their financial conditions. The Muslim converts from the Badr captives decided to stay in Medina, even though their family tried to ransom them, and take them back to Mecca. Another form of ransom had an educational dimension. Most of the captives were well educated, so they were entrusted with 10 Muslim children, and once these children learned to read and write, they were set free. Some captives were also set free when they swore that they would never raise their sword towards the Muslims again. The God has ordained as-sawm on all Muslims since the beginning of mankind. As-sawm literally means to abstain. But in Islamic context it refers to self-restraint and the achievement of self-control. In 624 CE, the last generation of mankind were ordained by the God to keep as-sawm for the whole month of Ramadan. Ramadan literally means a very hot day. Ramadan is the 9th month of the lunar calendar, and it was during this month the first verses of the Quran were revealed to the messenger of the God. While Muslims keep as-sawm, they are prohibited from eating, drinking, and having sexual intercourse with their spouse from dawn to sunset. And if anyone indulges in eating, drinking, sexual intercourse or in any kind of sins, their sawms are annulled. Children, the elderly, the sick, The wayfarer and women who are pregnant are excused from As-Sawm and they do not need to fast. Muslims can keep Sawm on any day of the year as they wish, except for the day of Eid al-Fitr, the day of Eid al-Adha and following next 3 days of Eid al-Adha. Eid literally means to celebrate a festival. Eid al-Fitr means the festival of breaking the fast. Eid al-Fitr is on the first day of Shawwal, the first day after the month of Ramadan. It is a day of celebration for the Muslims as they have achieved their goal, which was ordained by the God. They were successful keeping their self-control for a whole month, and they successfully trained themselves and learned to control themselves for the next 11 months. Eid al-Adha literally means the festival of sacrifice. Eid al-Adha is a 3-day celebration and Muslims sacrifice animals and share the meat with their family, neighbors, and with the poor, honoring the Prophet Abraham, who was prepared to sacrifice his only son for the God. By Eid al-Adha, the Muslims testify to the God that they are also prepared to sacrifice anything for the God, as Prophet Abraham was prepared to sacrifice. The day of Friday is considered a day of Eid for the Muslims, and on Fridays the Muslims gather at their local mosques and unitedly worship Allah, the one and true God. The victory at Badr was a great success for the Muslims. They have now become a force to be reckoned with in Arabia, both politically and economically. This made many envious in Medina, particularly the Jewish tribe of Banu Qaynuqa, who were hostile towards the Muslims from the very beginning. Few months after the Battle of Badr, a Jew from Banu Qaynuqa molested a Muslim woman, who was visiting one of their markets. The Jewish man was unaware that a Muslim man was present there. When the Muslim man saw what was happening, he killed the Jew. When the other Jews at the market saw this, they killed the Muslim man. This raised enmity between the Jewish tribe of Banu Qaynuqa and the Muslims. Following these events, the tribes of Medina expelled Banu Qaynuqa from Medina. The next year, in 625 CE, Meccan polytheists gathered more than 3,000 soldiers to invade Medina and eradicate Muslims. Scouts of Medina discovered this plot of the Mushrikeen of Mecca, the polytheists, and informed the Messenger of the God. The Messenger of the God gathered the Muslims and the Jews, and consulted with them the situation. It was the opinion of the Messenger of the God to defend Medina from inside the city. But the youths among the Muslims were very enthusiastic and wanted to stop the invasion before reaching Medina. The Jews of Medina did not wanted to participate to defend Medina. The Muslims were able to gather only about 1,000 Muslim men to defend Medina. Medina was surrounded by mountain ranges at all directions, except for one front. The polytheists of Mecca camped at the mountain of Uhud. The Muslim men set out towards the mountain of Uhud. The women and children in Medina remained vigilant on the rooftops with stones, in case the Muslim men were unable to stop the enemies from entering Medina. On the way towards the mountain of Uhud, 300 of the Munafiqun, the hypocrites, betrayed the Muslim army and returned back to Medina. Only 700 Muslim men went to Uhud to face the armies of Mushrikun, the polytheists, who were more than 4 times the number of the Muslims. On the first day of the battle, 70 Muslims were shaheed, and most Muslims were extremely injured, including the Messenger of the God. While only 22 polytheists were killed. The polytheists expected that the Muslims would accept the defeat and surrender, but the polytheists were astonished when the Muslims refused to surrender, even after such high casualties. The polytheists thought the Muslims must have received reinforcements, otherwise how can any army stand so strong after such devastating casualties? This thought created confusion amongst the polytheists. It frightened the polytheists extremely, because even after being an army of almost 3,000 soldiers, they were unable to overcome only 700 Muslims and enter Medina. But, on the contrary, there were no reinforcement for the Muslims. The Messenger of the God gathered the remaining Muslims on the second day, and prepared for the battle. But to the surprise of the Muslims, the polytheists of Mecca left the battlefield in confusion, failing to complete their mission to invade Medina and eradicate the Muslims. The behavior of Banu Nadir fluctuated between resignation and slackness, after the expulsion of Banu Qaynuqa. Banu Nadir was glad, because of the high casualties of Muslims at the Battle of Uhud. The Jewish leader, of Banu Nadir, rebelled, and treacherously in secret contacted with the polytheists of Mecca. The leader, of Banu Nadir tried to form an alliance between the polytheists, hypocrites, and the Jews, against the Muslims. Situations got more serious, when Banu Nadir tried to assassinate Prophet Muhammad. The assassination plot failed, and Banu Nadir was expelled, by the other Jewish tribes, and the rest of the tribes of Medina. Banu Nadir migrated to Khyber, and they were allowed to take their provisions with them. Banu Nadir did not leave any provision they owned in Medina. They took with them, even the pegs, and the beams of their ceilings. But this did not stop the Jews from plotting against the Muslims. In 627 CE, a number of leaders of Jews from Khyber went to the polytheists of Mecca, and several other tribes around Arabia, and invited them to besiege and invade Medina, and get rid of the Muslims once and for all. The polytheists of Mecca gladly accepted their proposition, and considered it as an opportunity to exact revenge against the Muslims. The other tribes of Arabia were reluctant to the proposal. The Jews persuaded these tribes, by tempting them with hopes of war booty. The Jews also bribed some of the tribes so that they fight the Muslims. The Jews of Khyber offered the Ghatafan tribe half the profits from the sales of their crops, in perpetuity. Therefore, many Arab tribes confederated against the Muslims, and gathered an army of 10,000 soldiers to attack Medina. Scouts of Medina informed the messenger of the God of the impending danger. The Prophet consulted the matter with the Muslims. Together, they came to the decision to dig trenches around Medina as defensive lines. The Muslims dug trenches in adverse conditions as food supplies ran low. The Muslims worked with diligence, but the munafiqun, the hypocrites, participated reluctantly. When the Confederates arrived in Medina, they could not enter it because of the trench. So they laid siege on Medina. The Muslim men, who were 3,000 in number, remained on guard at the trench, against the Confederate army of 10,000 soldiers. The Muslim women, children and the elderly remained inside the city. Meanwhile, Banu Nadir secretly sent emissaries to the Banu Qurayza, and tried to persuade them to break the treaty with the Muslims. Initially, Banu Qurayza were against such treachery, but eventually, they gave in to the repeated persuasions of Banu Nadir. Banu Qurayza attacked the Muslim women and children in the city. The women fought back, and spread rumors that Muslim men are here to protect them. This news reached to the Muslims at the trench. The messenger of the God quickly dispatched some of his companions to persuade the Jews of Banu Qurayza not to breach the constitution, but they declined. The Muslims were in grave danger, with enemies on both fronts, and their women and children open to attack from the Jews of Banu Qurayza. The Prophet therefore sent some Muslim men inside the city to protect the women, children and the elderly from the Banu Qurayza. The Muslims were involved in light skirmishes and arrow hurling at the trench with the enemy. After 1 month of siege, the Confederates were suffering from shortage of supplies, and they were afflicted by a mighty desert storm. So they forfeited their mission and left. On the same day, the Muslims marched towards Banu Qurayza. Banu Qurayza surrendered on the condition of having a judge of their own choice. The Muslims agreed. The Jews chose Sa'd bin Mu'adh, who was their ally from the tribe of Banu Aus, as the judge, and pleaded that they should be judged by the scriptures of the Jews. After all the hearing, Sa'd bin Mu'adh gave the verdict that all men who has committed treason should be killed, according to the books of Jews, and the rest of the Jews should live under surveillance. After the third attempt to invade Medina, the polytheists realized it was not possible for them, even unitedly, to seize Medina. In 628 CE, the messenger of the God and Muslims decided to perform Hajj. It was against the social norm of Mecca to prevent anyone from performing Hajj, even their enemies. The messenger of the God, with 1,400 Muslims, began a month-long journey towards Mecca, wearing the dress of Hajj, 2 pieces of unsound white cloth. the Muslims had with them little provision for their journey, and their sacrificial animal. When the Meccan polytheists learned about this journey, they sent 200 soldiers to investigate. When they were spying on the Muslims, they realized that the Muslims were here only to perform Hajj. It was not an invasion. The Muslims were unarmed. When Muslims realized that soldiers had been sent against them, they changed their route and settled in Hudaybiyah. When the soldiers returned, they explained the polytheists about the situation, that the Muslims are here only to perform Hajj. The Muslims did not have any weapon or armor. So, the Meccans sent their leader and diplomats to Hudaybiyah, to negotiate with the Muslims. This was a grand opportunity for the polytheists to eradicate their greatest enemies, unarmed in the middle of the desert far from Medina. The diplomats tried to intimidate the Muslims to surrender, and threatened them with attack, and remind the Muslims that they were unarmed. The Muslims refused to surrender, and tried to reason with them that they were only here to perform Hajj. When the Muslims refused to surrender, the diplomats attempted to break the unity of the Muslims, but their attempts were in vain, and on the contrary the diplomats got highly intimidated by the unity of the Muslims. The diplomats returned to their people, and informed the polytheists about the attitude of the Muslims, and about the situations, that the Muslims are extremely united, and highly vigorous, and attacking Muslims in this situation can lead us to an atrocious fate. In the meantime, the Muslims sent their arbitrator Usman bin Affan to Mecca. Usman bin Affan proposed the polytheists to allow the Muslims to perform Hajj, but the polytheists rejected his proposal, and said that they would only allow Usman bin Affan to perform the Hajj, as he was already in Mecca, but Usman bin Affan refused to perform Hajj without his Muslim brothers. Meanwhile, rumors spread that Usman bin Affan had been killed, and when the Muslims learned about this, they all swore to avenge the blood of Usman bin Affan, and decided to fight back with the polytheists with their small animal sacrificial knives. This is known as the Bayat ul-Ridwan. The Muslims believed that the attack on one Muslim is attack on all Muslims. After Bayat ul-Ridwan, Usman bin Affan returned, and the rumors were proven false. When the news of Bayat ul-Ridwan reached the Mushrikin, the polytheists, they sent an arbitrator to the Muslims to negotiate with them. After a lot of argument they finally negotiated the following terms. The Muslims shall not be allowed to perform pilgrimage this year, and come back next year, but they shall not stay in Mecca for more than 3 days. They shall not come back armed, but can bring with them small animal sacrificial knives, and it should be in the sheath, in a bag. War activities between the Muslims and the Meccan polytheists shall be suspended for 10 years, during which both parties will live in full security and neither will raise sword against the other. If anyone from Mecca converts to Islam, and goes over to Medina to join the Muslims, without his guardian's permission, he should be sent back to Mecca, but should any of the Muslims from Medina return to Mecca and convert to polytheism, then he shall not be sent back to Medina. Whosoever wishes to join Muslims, or enter into treaty with the Muslims, should have the liberty to do so. And likewise, whosoever wishes to join Meccan polytheists, or enter into treaty with them, should be allowed to do so. This treaty is known as the Treaty of Hudaybiyah. After the treaty was signed, the Muslims returned back to Medina without performing the pilgrimage to Kaaba. After the Treaty of Hudaybiyah, the Muslims got a glorious opportunity to broadly preach Islam. Therefore, masses entered into Islam from the whole of Arabia, including Mecca. People who entered Islam, after the Treaty of Hudaybiyah from Mecca, were prevented from taking asylum in Medina. The Muslims of Medina were also helpless against the Hudaybiyah Treaty. So, the helpless new Muslims from Mecca took refuge in Saif al-Bahr, and they were considered fugitives by the polytheists of Mecca. These helpless Muslims were living a life without any provision in the harsh mountains and deserts of Arabia. They had left their properties in Mecca, which were now seized by the polytheists of Mecca. With time, the number of the fugitive Muslims increased, and the polytheists started to hunt these fugitive Muslims. Helplessly to survive, the fugitive Muslims of the mountains retaliated against the polytheists of Mecca. The fugitive Muslims won't enter Mecca or Medina, but would rob the caravans of Mecca for survival, as they were not allowed to accept help for provision from Medina. After a while, these fugitives became unbearable for the polytheists of Mecca, because Mecca was a business state, and robbing their business caravans was causing great losses in their business. So, they contacted the messenger of the God, and requested to annul the fourth clause of the Hudaybiyah Treaty. And the fugitive Muslims were welcomed in Medina. Muslims are not allowed to create mischief on the land, and breach the peace of the society, or force Islam on anyone. But if there is a threat of life, or Muslims are prevented from practicing and propagating the way of life from the God, it is not only allowed but mandatory for the Muslims to defend and fight for their liberty. And if necessary and in power, invasion is also allowed to avoid attacks, and to defeat the hate-mongers and the evils of the society, and establish peace. Invasion is also allowed when peace treaties are broken, and all the attempts for pacification have failed. According to the Quran, Muslims are ordained to fight those who want to fight with the Muslims, but forbidden to transgress the limits. The Muslims are ordained to kill and expel those who have oppressed the Muslims, and have wrongfully taken their properties, and expelled the Muslims from their land. Fight is allowed until there is no more fitna, trial, tumult, tribulation, etc. If the non-Muslims cease enmity, then the God is oft forgiving, most merciful. Let there be no transgression except against az-zalimun, the oppressors. Indeed, the God does not like transgressors and oppressors. Muslims are not allowed to invade any nation with whom there is peace, Islamic or non-Islamic, or those who are non-Muslims, but they approaches the Muslims with their hearts restraining from fighting, as well as fighting their own people who are non-Muslims. So, if these people, non-Muslims, withdraw from fighting, and fight not against the Muslims, and offers peace with the Muslims, then the God has opened no way for the Muslims to fight against these peaceful people, non-Muslims. Then there are others who wish to have security from the Muslims, and security from their people, who desires to harm the Muslims. Every time these non-Muslims, who want security from the Muslims and their own people, are sent to temptation by their own people, they give themselves up to temptation. If these people withdraw not from the evil plotting, nor offer the Muslims peace, nor restrain their hands from harming the Muslims, then the Muslims are ordained by the God to seize them and kill them wherever these people are overtaken, battlefield. In the case of such people, the God has provided the Muslims with a clear warrant against them. If the non-Muslims are fighting collectively against the Muslims, then the Muslims are also ordained to fight collectively against the non-Muslims. If the non-Muslims incline to peace, the Muslims will also have to incline to peace, and put their trust in the God. Verily, the God is the All-Hearer, the All-Knower. The God commanded and informed the Muslims that, perhaps the God will make friendship between the Muslims, and those whom Muslims hold as enemies. And the God has power over all things, and the God is oft forgiving, most merciful. The God does not forbid the Muslims to deal justly and kindly with those who do not fight against the Muslims, on the account of religion, and did not drive the Muslims out of their homes. Verily, the God loves those who deal with equity. The God only forbids the Muslims to befriend those who fight against the Muslims on the account of religion, and have driven and helped others to drive out the Muslims. These are the people whom the God forbids the Muslims to befriend them. And whosoever will befriend them, then such are the Zalimun, oppressors. When Muslims invade any nation, they follow a strict code of conduct, as ordained in the Quran and the Hadith. Even when all the doors of peace are closed, Muslims do not invade without warning. Before any invasion, the Muslims offer 3 options to the inhabitants, to avoid the invasion. They are invited to peace treaties, afford the Muslims, and invited in Islam. If they agree, then there will be peace. And those who accepted Islam, are invited to migrate in Medina, to live a life in sanctuary, and have the privileges from the Muslims' hospitalities, but if the new converts choose to remain in their native land, they are allowed to live there, if there are no threat of life from the non-Muslims. They are invited to live under the Islamic government as non-Muslims. The Islamic government will ensure their safety, protection, shelter, etc., in return for tax. If they accept any of the above option, then there will be peace, but if they refuse to accept any of the options above, the Muslims would fight them. If the non-Muslims desires peace with Muslims, those non-Muslims has to be scooted to safety by the Muslims. The Muslims are not allowed to force anyone to leave their religion and accept Islam. The Muslims are not allowed to commit zina, adultery, fornication, etc. or rape. The Muslims are not allowed to kill women. The Muslims are not allowed to kill children. The Muslims are not allowed to kill an aged infirm person. The Muslims are not allowed to cut down fruit-bearing trees. The Muslims are not allowed to destroy an inhabited place. The Muslims are not allowed to slaughter sheep or camels, except for food. The Muslims are not allowed to burn bees and scatter them. According to the opinion of the scholars, the bees here represent any kind of chemical weapons. The Muslims are not allowed to steal from the booty. The Muslims are not allowed to act cowardly. The Muslims are not allowed to mutilate the dead, who has fallen in the battle from amongst the enemy. The Muslims are not allowed to participate in any invasion below the age of 15, but, if the Muslims are attacked on their land, then there is no age restriction for defending their lives and properties. The Treaty of Hudaybiyah had effectively neutralized one of the major opponents of the Muslims, the Meccan polytheists. But in the north, the Jews of Khyber continued their efforts to instigate the tribes of Arabia against the Muslims. The messenger of the God was aware of this, and sent envoys to the Jews of Khyber, and tried for reconciliation, and to make peace with the Jews. However, all these efforts were in vain. So, in order to avoid another invasion, the messenger of the God set off with 1,400 men to invade Khyber. After a few days of fighting, all of Khyber was conquered by the Muslims. Among the Jews, 93 were killed, and among the Muslims only 18 were martyred. The Muslims dealt with the Jews in accordance with the code of conduct as laid down in the Quran and the Hadith. Unlike the Jews or polytheists, the Muslims did not eradicate the Jews from Khyber, and they were allowed to stay in Khyber and cultivate their land. The Jews agreed that they would live under surveillance, and won't plan or plot to attack the Muslims anymore, and the people of Khyber would also have to share their crops with the Muslims. Before the conquest of Khyber, the messenger of the God ordained the Muslims of Abyssinia to migrate to Medina. After the conquest of Khyber, when the Muslims returned to Medina, they discovered that the Muslims of Abyssinia have arrived, so it was a double celebration for the Muslims, as they were reunited after many years. In the year 629 CE, 2,000 Muslims went to perform the Hajj pilgrimage to Mecca, in accordance to the Hudaybiyah Treaty, and the people of Mecca were true to their covenant. But, some of the people of Mecca were very upset and angry at their own people for maintaining the peace treaty, and considered it as a shame and defeat. And these people were very enthusiastic to break the Hudaybiyah Treaty, and they looked for opportunities, but they failed. After the Hajj, the Muslims safely returned to Medina. The two superpowers of the 7th century were the Roman Empire and the Sasanian Empire. The rise of Islam intimidated these superpowers, as these two superpowers were always at war with one another, and the rise of the third superpower was threatening their dominance. Initially, the Roman Empire did not give much attention to the Muslims, but when they saw the rapid growth of Islam they got alert, as Islam was also entering the Roman Empire. In the year 629 CE, the Roman Empire raised an army to attack the Muslims, and killed the Muslim ambassador who was carrying message to the Emperor of Basra, which was under the Sasanian Empire, and they also killed the scholars and preachers at al-Baqla. When this news reached the Muslims, the messenger of the God prepared a Muslim army to defend at the front of Mu'tah. The messenger of the God did not participate in this defensive expedition, but designated some of his eminent companions as generals to lead the expedition. The Muslims made a difficult journey, in adverse conditions to reach Mu'tah. This Muslim army was able to stop the Roman soldiers from marching further into Arabia. Many prominent companions of the messenger of the God were martyred in the Battle of Mu'tah. In 630 CE, the Hudaybiyah Treaty was broken by the polytheists of Mecca. Muslims were killed by the polytheists while making a journey. The God revealed verses to the messenger of the God, informing the Muslims that they are no longer obliged by the treaty. The God commanded the Muslims to take action against those who has broken the covenant. Since the Hudaybiyah Treaty, Muslims were able to propagate Islam colossally, and reach out towards the bulk of Arabia. Majority accepted Islam with open heart. The Muslims organized 10,000 soldiers to conquer Mecca. People of Mecca were unaware about this attack, and when they saw the huge Muslim army, they had no choice but to surrender. People of Mecca did not try to defend their city, and the Mecca was conquered without bloodshed. In addition to the previous conditions of the warfare, the messenger of the God gave these conditions. The messenger of the God announced that the properties and wealths of the people of Mecca are safe. The people of Mecca are safe, as long as they do not rebel, and whoever confines themselves in their house are safe. Few rebels tried to agitate the people of Mecca against the messenger of the God, but they were condemned by the people of Mecca, and 17 rebels were listed for death penalty, but many of them were forgiven, when they promised to stop creating mischief on the land. After the conquest of Mecca, majority of the people of Mecca entered into Islam. Many of them were already Muslims, but they were afraid to reveal their true religion, in the fear of prosecution. The hearts of the polytheists also softened, when they saw the positive attitude of the Muslims towards the polytheists, even after such bitter history. The messenger of the God established peace and regulations in Mecca, and gave the ruling of zakat and jizya, to elevate the society and established equity. The God has ordained that all the Muslims who are financially solvent has to pay from their yearly saving 2.5% in charity to the poor and the needy of the society. This is known as zakat. Zakat means a state or condition of being pure. By establishing the zakat, the Muslims purify their wealth, because the Muslims believe that there are shares for the poor and needy in the wealth of the rich. In an Islamic state, the zakat are collected by the government, and employed to alleviate the poverty and to improve the living condition of the people. The non-Muslims under an Islamic state also has to pay something like zakat to the government. This is known as jizya. Jizya literally means tax. If a non-Muslim is in a poor condition, or has reached an age where he cannot earn his livelihood, in an Islamic state the government pays for their livelihood, and they do not have to pay the jizya. The people of Mecca were afraid that they have turned into enemies, for those with whom they had confederated before, and attacked the Muslims in Medina. The greatest threats for the people of Mecca were the people of Taif, a city just beside Mecca. Meanwhile, a scout of the Muslims informed the messenger of the God that the people of Taif have prepared 20,000 soldiers to attack Mecca. If the messenger of the God leaves Mecca, with Muslim armies of Medina, it would be a great danger for the people of Mecca, and the new Muslims. The messenger of the God decided to solve the matter by either diplomacy or war, and prepared the Muslims for both. The messenger of the God requested the new Muslims to join with the army of Medina, and as there were no casualties in the conquest of Mecca, 10,000 soldiers were already prepared. The newly converted 2,000 Muslims joined the army, making a total of 12,000 Muslim soldiers. The messenger of the God requested the polytheists of Mecca to share their swords and armor with the Muslims, if they don't want to participate for the siege of Taif. The polytheists of Mecca agreed to share their swords and armors on the condition that these swords and armors should be returned to them, and if there should be any loss of the sword and armor, they should be paid justly for the loss, and the messenger of the God agreed to the condition. 19 days after the conquest of Mecca, 12,000 Muslims marched for Taif. To the surprise of the Muslims, the people of Taif attacked the Muslims before reaching Taif, at a valley called Tunayin. The soldiers of Taif were hiding on the top of the mountains and waiting for the Muslims. The soldiers of Taif were showering arrows from every direction, and vigorously attacking the Muslims. The Muslims began to retreat. But by the call of the messenger of the God they reformed together and fought back. This time the soldiers of Taif started to run away, and the Muslims were chasing them. The soldiers of Taif left their children and women back, and ran into their fort inside the city to save their own selves. 6,000 men, women and children were taken captive by the Muslims. The Muslims surround the forts of Taif for 20 days, and left on the condition that, if anyone accepts Islam, they should be left free, and if the people of Taif causes further trouble for the people of Mecca, or the Muslims, then the Muslims would return to avenge. The Muslims returned to Mecca. They performed the Hajj. Then they returned to Medina. The 6,000 captives were living with the Muslim households under the conditions of Islamic captivity. And no one from Taif tried to free or ransom their families. After all these events, the relation between Mecca and Taif got better with time, as Taif and Mecca were business states, and they had good commercial trades. When the relation between Taif and Mecca got better, the people of Taif had a grand opportunity to learn about Islam, and majority of the people recognized the truth about Islam, and rejected their pagan and polytheistic way of life, and accepted Islam. And 11 months after the siege of Taif, the people of Taif went to Medina and informed the Muslims about their acceptance of Islam, and the Muslims returned all the war captives of Taif back to their families. Initially, many of the captives were reluctant to return to their families, as they had accepted Islam, and didn't want to return to a polytheistic society, but when the captives learned about the acceptance of Islam of the people of Taif, the captives rejoicingly returned to their families. In 630 CE, after the conquest of Mecca, the Muslims have become the third superpower of the 7th century. People of Arabia from Yemen to the tribe of Ghassanids accepted Islam. It concerned the Roman Empire extremely, because of the Battle of Mu'tah, and the killing of the Islamic scholars, propagators and ambassadors who was carrying messages to Basra, which was under the Sasanian Empire, the second superpower. To meet these exigencies, the Emperor Heraclius congregated a huge army of the Romans, and pro-Roman tribes, Ghassanids, to launch a decisive battle against the Muslims and conquer Medina. When this news reached the Muslims, the messenger of the god assembled 30,000 Muslim men, and began the journey of 350 miles towards north, at Tabuk, at the border shared by the Romans and the Muslims. But to the surprise of the Muslims, the Romans have run away from their camps at Tabuk. And the tribes, who used to ally the Romans, turned their alliance to Muslims and agreed to pay the jizya. After waiting for the Romans to show up for the battles, the Muslims left the Tabuk without any battle and returned to Medina. So this part of the Roman Empire came into Islam without any bloodshed. In 632 CE, the messenger of the god decided to perform the Hajj. Huge crowds of Muslims from all over Arabia joined him for the Hajj, to Mecca. During the Hajj the messenger of the god gave speeches, and stated the following. O people! Listen to what I say. I do not know whether I will ever meet you at this place once again after this current year. It is unlawful for you to shed the blood of one another, or take unlawfully the fortunes of one another. They are as unlawful, as shedding blood on such a day as today, and in such a month as this prohibited month, and in such a sanctified city as this sacred city. Behold! All practices of paganism and ignorance are now under my feet. The blood revenge of the pre-Islamic time are remitted. O people! Fear Allah, concerning women. Verily, you have taken them on the security of Allah, and have made their persons lawful unto you, by words of Allah. It is incumbent upon them to honor their conjugal rights, and not to commit acts of impropriety, which, if they do, you have authority to chastise them, yet not severely. If your wives refrain from impropriety, and are faithful to you, clothe and feed them suitably. Verily, I have left amongst you the book of the God, Qur'an, and my traditions, the Hadith, which if you hold fast, you shall never go astray. O people, I am not succeeded by a prophet, and you are not succeeded by any nation. So, I recommend you to worship your Lord, to pray the 5 prayers, to fast in the month of Ramadan, and to offer the zakat of your provision, willingly. I recommend you to do the pilgrimage to the sacred house of your Lord, the God, Allah, and to obey those who are in charge of you, then you will be awarded to enter the paradise of your Lord, the God, Allah. Then the messenger of the God asked the audience, "Have I not delivered the message of my Lord, the God, Allah?" The audience replied, "Yes, you have." The Prophet then said, "O Allah, bear witness. Let him that is present convey the message unto him who is absent. For haply, many people to whom the message is conveyed may be more mindful of it than the audience here." As soon as the messenger of the God, accomplishing delivering the speech, the following verse of the Quran was revealed to him. "This day, I have perfected your religion for you, completed my favor upon you, and have chosen for you Islam as your religion." And this was the final verse of the Quran to be revealed to the messenger of the God. After performing all the rituals of Hajj, the Prophet returned back to Medina. After a few months, in the same year, the messenger of the God became sick, from which he never recovered. During his last days of sickness, the messenger of the God kept reminding the people of the duties they owe to the God. The messenger of the God asked them not to make his grave into a tomb, which is worshipped. The total number of days he remained sick was 13 or 14, and after that he died. And his last words were, "The most exalted companionship, on high. To Allah, the God, we turn, and to him, we turn for help and last abode."